Have you ever been truly, utterly alone, surrounded by the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and groan of an empty building? Imagine the vast, echoing hallways of a deserted office complex at 3 a.m., fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Every reflective surface shows your own pale face, a silent promise that you're the only living soul present. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. So before the story truly begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to post your city and local time in the comments below. And if you've had a similar creepy encounter, share it below. Maybe your story will inspire the next one. Now, lock the door and turn off the lights. Turn up the volume and pay attention. Maybe you're not as alone as you think. Our story begins now. My name is Mark, and for 5 years, my world revolved around the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic thud of my boots on polished linoleum floors. I was a security guard at what the company called a multi-purpose corporate facility, a fancy term for a sprawling, somewhat labyrinthine building that housed everything from a tech startup on the 3rd floor to a financial consulting firm on the 5th, and even a small, rarely used auditorium in the basement. My hours were the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. Most people thought it was boring, and for the most part they were right. It was a job filled with routine. Hourly patrols, checking doors, ensuring alarms were set, and occasionally dealing with a disgruntled cleaner who'd locked themselves out of a supply closet. The most exciting thing that usually happened was a burst pipe or a squirrel getting into the ventilation system and causing a ruckus. The building itself was old, built in the late 70s but well maintained. Its brick facade was covered in ivy, and inside, the decor leaned heavily into muted greens and browns, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a dimly lit hospital than a bustling corporate hub during the day. At night, it transformed. The silence was profound, broken only by the ventilation system's low groan or the distant, intermittent traffic sounds from the highway. My tools were simple: a heavy-duty flashlight, a walkie-talkie clipped to my belt, and a logbook where I meticulously recorded every patrol, every door checked, every anomaly, however minor. It was my reliable companion, filled with pages detailing the mundane ebb and flow of a typical night shift. I remember one night, it must have been a Tuesday, around 2 a.m. I was doing my second full sweep of the 5th floor. It was notoriously quiet up there. The financial firm there kept late hours, but by the time my shift started, it was usually deserted. I was checking the fire exits, making sure the crash bars weren't propped open, when I heard it, a faint, almost metallic scraping sound coming from the far end of the hallway, near the executive offices. It stopped as soon as I paused, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. I stood there, listening for a good minute. Nothing, just the hum of the light fixtures. I chalked it up to the building settling, maybe the old pipes or the ventilation ducts contracting in the cooler night air. It happened all the time in old buildings, a phantom creak, a ghostly groan. You learn to ignore them, or at least rationalize them away, especially when you're the only one around. But something about that particular sound, so distinct yet so fleeting, stuck with me. It was like someone had dragged a heavy key across a metal surface, or perhaps a chair. Too sharp for an old building, too sudden. My routine dictated I check every office suite on each floor. Most were just dark, empty boxes. On this particular floor, there was a specific suite, number 507, that I always found myself lingering at. It was an unused space, marked for renovation, but it always felt colder than the rest of the floor, even with the heating consistent throughout the building. I'd mentioned it in my logbook once, just a note about an unusual temperature drop, but my supervisor, a gruff ex-military man named Miller, just grunted and told me to make sure the windows were closed. He believed in practical explanations always, but the feeling persisted. It was as if the air itself was denser inside that suite, a palpable weight pressing down. On my rounds, I'd always shine my flashlight into the glass partitioning of 507, just a quick sweep to reassure myself it was empty. No vagrants or curious kids had gotten in. This night, as the beam cut through the darkness, I saw nothing unusual. Just the dust motes dancing in the light, the bare concrete floor, and the faint outline of old, forgotten cabling. Yet as I pulled the beam away, I felt a distinct chill, not just in the air, but crawling up my spine, a feeling I couldn't shake off. It was almost as if something had been staring back, just beyond the reach of my light. I continued my patrol, checking the remaining offices, the break room, and the restrooms. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I tried to focus on the mundane, the faint smell of industrial cleaning solution, the slight wobble in the third-floor elevator's automatic door closer, the way the condensation formed intricate patterns on the windows facing the parking lot. These were the grounding details of my night shift reports, the anchors in a sea of quiet solitude. But the memory of that sharp, scraping sound and the inexplicable coldness of Suite 507 lingered. It was a subtle shift in the usual monotony, a whisper of something unsettled at the edges of my perception. I wrote it off as fatigue, maybe a bit of cabin fever from too many nights alone in the building. As a security guard, you learn to trust your instincts, but also to dismiss the irrational. You had to, otherwise every shadow became a monster, every creak a ghost. Still, the small unease nestled in the back of my mind, a tiny seed of apprehension planted in the soil of a perfectly normal, quiet night. It was the first time I felt truly aware of how vast and empty the building truly was, and how small I was within it. The vastness suddenly felt less like peace and more like vulnerability. That subtle unease, the one that had settled in during my last patrol, refused to dissipate. The following nights brought no relief. In fact, the routine that once offered such comfort began to feel less like a structured duty and more like an exposed ritual. I was no longer just the diligent security guard making my rounds. I was someone acutely aware of the vast, empty spaces around me, constantly listening, constantly questioning. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, once a soothing white noise, now seemed to vibrate with an unspoken tension. It started subtly, as these things always do. Faint sounds, almost imperceptible at first, would drift from parts of the building I just checked. A soft thud from the floor above, a creak that sounded suspiciously like a door opening and closing on the floor below. I'd pause, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, listening intently. The sounds would always stop, leaving me in that profound, echoing silence. My logical mind, trained by years of rationalizing away bumps in the night, would attribute them to settling pipes, the wind playing tricks on loose panels, or even my own footsteps echoing back to me from unexpected angles. After all, a large building like this, with its intricate network of vents and shafts, could easily carry sound. But the frequency increased. It wasn't just once or twice a night anymore. It was every patrol, sometimes multiple times per patrol. One particular night, perhaps a week after the incident with Suite 507, I was in the main lobby, checking the entry points. The lobby was a grand, two-story space with a massive glass wall overlooking the empty parking lot. My desk, usually my sanctuary, felt less secure now. I finished my paperwork, diligently noting down the mundane details for my night shift reports, main entrance secure, all lights functioning, that sort of thing. Just as I was about to stand up for my next round, I heard it clearly, distinctively, from the second-floor mezzanine directly above me. It was a faint whisper, not a single word, not even a distinct sound, but the unmistakable murmur of voices, like a hushed conversation, barely audible. My blood ran cold. There was no one else in the building. There couldn't be. I had checked every accessible door, every window, every alarm was armed. I grabbed my walkie-talkie, my hand trembling slightly, but caught myself. Who would I even call? Miller would just tell me to focus. Besides, what would I say? I think I heard whispers. He'd probably suggest I was working too many hours. I stood there, craning my neck, staring up into the darkened mezzanine. The security cameras I had access to from my desk showed nothing but static views of empty chairs and dark hallways. The whispers continued for a moment, then faded, leaving behind an unbearable silence. I convinced myself it must have been the ventilation system, maybe picking up a distant radio signal from outside, or perhaps even a strange auditory illusion caused by fatigue. It felt like a plausible explanation, one I desperately wanted to believe, but my gut tightened into an anxious knot. I decided to do an unscheduled patrol of the second floor, flashlight in hand, my senses on high alert. The second floor housed several smaller offices and a communal break area. The air was still and heavy. I walked slowly, deliberately, my own footsteps seeming deafening in the silence. I checked each office door, trying the handles, shining my light into the darkened interiors. Everything was secure. As I passed what used to be a call center, a large, open-plan office with dozens of abandoned cubicles, the whispers returned. This time they were closer, more distinct, emanating from within the depths of that empty space. It sounded like several voices, overlaid, speaking rapidly, but still just beyond the grasp of comprehension. My heart pounded against my ribs. I stood at the threshold of the call center, my flashlight beam sweeping across the desolate cubicles, illuminating empty chairs and dormant computer monitors. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, disembodied echoes in the vast, empty room. Then just as I was about to step inside, the sound abruptly vanished, replaced by an eerie, profound quiet. The sudden cessation was almost as startling as the whispers themselves. I lingered there, straining to hear anything, but the silence was absolute. I walked into the call center, my boots crunching faintly on what felt like scattered dust. I checked every cubicle, even looking under desks, a futile exercise, but one that my pounding heart demanded. Nothing, not a single sign of forced entry, no footprints in the dust, no open windows. As I left the call center, my flashlight beam caught something peculiar in the hallway. One of the old motion-activated wall sconces, the kind that blinked on when you walked past, flickered erratically at the far end of the corridor where the executive washrooms were located. It wasn't just a normal flicker. It was a rapid, almost frantic pulsing of light. I'd seen lights flicker before, of course, but this felt different. It was too insistent, too deliberate. Another element of ambiguity to add to the growing list of unexplained phenomena. Was it simply a faulty ballast, or was something else causing it? I made my way down the corridor towards the flickering light. As I approached, it suddenly went dark, plunging that section of the hall into deeper shadow. I shone my flashlight there, illuminating the empty space. Nothing, just an old light fixture, possibly at the end of its life cycle. Yet the distinct feeling that something had just been there, hidden in the pulsating light, lingered. I continued my patrol, trying to find rational explanations for everything, but the rational explanations were beginning to wear thin. The building, which I had always considered predictable and inert, was starting to feel alive in a way that was far from comforting. My logbook entries for those nights were intentionally vague, filled with general observations about security checks and light functionality, carefully omitting the whispers and the peculiar light. After all, who would believe a security guard who started reporting ghostly conversations? But internally, my own night shift reports were being written with a very different and much more terrifying pen. The whispers became a regular part of my patrols, insidious and unsettling. They never formed coherent words, always just a jumble of low, indistinct sounds, like a radio tuning between stations, catching snippets of conversations that weren't meant for me. They would follow me, or so it felt, appearing on the floor above or below, always just out of reach, always stopping the moment I paused or shone my flashlight in their direction. My rational mind, once so adept at dismissing the unexplainable, was now working overtime, frantically trying to construct plausible theories. Faulty wiring, air currents creating strange acoustic phenomena, my own increasing fatigue. Anything but the alternative. As a security guard, I was supposed to be the embodiment of control and order in a chaotic world, but that control was slipping. One night, the strange occurrences escalated beyond mere auditory illusions. I was doing my sweep on the fourth floor, which housed a small, rarely used server room and a series of empty, unfurnished office spaces. The air felt particularly heavy that evening, almost still, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. I was checking the fire escape door, ensuring its alarm was armed, when my flashlight beam swept across the far wall of the corridor. There, etched into the dusty surface, were what looked like scratches. Not superficial scuffs, but deep, deliberate gouges, as if something sharp and heavy had been dragged down the wall. They started low near the floor and ascended diagonally, ending about 2 feet up, roughly the height of a small child or perhaps a large animal. My breath hitched. I moved closer, shining my light directly on them. The dust had been disturbed around the marks, proving they were recent. There was no construction going on at that end of the floor, no reason for such damage. This was beyond a settling building or a faulty light. This was physical evidence of something amiss. I reached out, my fingers tracing the jagged lines. The wall felt cold, unusually so, even colder than the ambient temperature of the corridor. For a moment, my mind went blank trying to process this. Vandalism. But how? The building was locked tight. No security breaches according to the logs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I pulled out my phone, intending to take a picture and log it, but hesitated. What would I report? Strange scratches appeared on the fourth floor wall, unknown origin. Miller would have a field day. He'd think I was cracking up. Instead, I just made a quick, vague note in my logbook about minor wall scuffing on the fourth floor, promising myself I'd keep a closer eye on it. The scratches left an unsettling feeling, a tangible sign that whatever was making these noises, whatever was creating this pervasive sense of unease, was now leaving its mark. It was almost a challenge. The night shift reports I was submitting were becoming a facade, a flimsy barrier against the unsettling reality of what I was experiencing. Later that same night, as I was making my rounds on the first floor, something else happened. The building's directory board, a large, backlit panel in the main lobby displaying company names and floor numbers, flickered and then suddenly went dark. This wasn't unusual in itself. Bulb failures happen. But then it came back on, and the names of the companies began to scroll rapidly, like a glitching computer screen. It wasn't alphabetical or numerical or even random. It was a chaotic, dizzying blur of text, stopping abruptly on one name, Suite 507. My blood ran cold. The unused, colder than usual space on the fifth floor, the one I always felt a perverse pull to check. It was just a coincidence, I told myself, a power surge, a malfunction. But the sheer specificity, halting on that particular, ominous suite number, made my stomach clench. I stared at the directory board, the words Suite 507, glowing eerily in the dim lobby. I quickly checked the control panel for the directory. Everything seemed normal, no error codes, no signs of a power surge. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a bizarre electrical anomaly, but the image of those scratches on the fourth floor, coupled with the whispers that seemed to follow me like a private haunting, made it impossible. The ambiguity of it all was maddening. Was I imagining things? Was I just sleep-deprived and overly sensitive to the usual sounds of an old building, or was something truly happening? I decided I needed to get eyes on Suite 507, despite having just patrolled the fifth floor an hour before. The thought of it sitting there, dark and empty, yet selected by the glitching directory, was too much to bear. As I ascended in the elevator, the ride felt longer, colder. The usual soft hum of the machinery seemed to amplify the silence. When the doors opened on the fifth floor, the air was noticeably cooler again, a sharp, palpable drop in temperature that made me shiver despite my thick security uniform. I walked quickly down the hall, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the gloom. The whispers were back, faint but insistent, seeming to emanate from the direction of Suite 507. My hand was clammy on the flashlight. My heart was pounding, a wild bird trapped in my chest. I reached the suite, its frosted glass door looking even more opaque than usual, as if concealing something truly dark within. I pressed my face close to the glass, trying to peer through the translucent surface. I saw nothing but shadows, the hint of concrete walls, and the vague outline of what looked like a pile of debris in the corner. But the coldness radiating from behind the glass was intense, seeping through the material and chilling me to the bone. And then I heard it again, not a whisper this time, but a distinct, low groan, a sound of profound pain or effort coming from within the suite. It was the sound of something struggling, something alive, yet utterly unlike anything I had ever heard, and it was definitely not human. The groan from inside Suite 507 wasn't just a sound, it was an experience. It resonated deep in my bones, a low, guttural noise that vibrated with a primal agony and an unsettling, unnatural quality. It was too deep for a human, too drawn out, and filled with a raw, non-human quality that sent a shiver down my spine. My immediate instinct was to call it in, to report a potential break-in or someone in distress, but the sheer wrongness of the sound, coupled with all the preceding events, held me back. I was standing there, frozen, flashlight beams still pointed uselessly at the frosted glass, my breath fogging slightly in the cold air. I forced myself to move, pulling back from the door, my mind racing. What could it be? An animal? Unlikely, not inside a locked suite on the 5th floor of a corporate building. A hallucination. I pinched myself hard. No, the cold was real, the sound had been real, and the fear blooming in my chest was very real. My training as a security guard kicked in, urging me to investigate. My survival instinct screamed at me to run. I was caught between two powerful, conflicting directives. I considered calling Miller, but what would I say? There's something groaning in Suite 507, and it doesn't sound human. He'd laugh, then probably put me on desk duty for a week. Besides, I somehow knew this wasn't something a normal police officer or supervisor could handle. This felt different. I took a deep, shaky breath and decided to perform a full perimeter check of the 5th floor again, trying to circle back to Suite 507 in a few minutes, hoping the sound would be gone, that it had been a trick of the acoustics, a momentary lapse of sanity. As I walked, I kept glancing back at the suite, half expecting the frosted glass to glow or the door to slowly creak open. Nothing happened. The silence that followed the groan was even more oppressive than before, thick with unspoken dread. The scratches on the 4th floor, the whispering, the directory board, they all converged, painting a picture that my rational mind stubbornly refused to acknowledge. This wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. These were not the typical night shift reports I was accustomed to writing. I completed my hurried patrol of the rest of the floor, checking the other offices, the emergency exits. Everything was as it should be, yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. As I passed the elevators, something on my walkie-talkie desk at the lobby desk crackled. It wasn't Miller or any of the usual chatter from other guards on different sites. It was a faint, distorted voice, barely audible over the static. It sounded like it was struggling, stretched thin, like a signal fighting through immense interference. My hand instinctively went to my walkie-talkie, pulling it from my belt. The static intensified, then subsided slightly, and a sound emerged. It was a voice, yes, but not a human voice. It was deep, raspy, and fragmented, like rocks grinding together, or dry leaves being dragged across concrete. It was devoid of inflection, a flat, monotonous drone that nevertheless carried an immense weight of wrongness. See, Urity, the voice rasped, broken by bursts of static. See, Urity, a C, stance. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a distress call from an employee or a faulty radio transmission. This was coming from within the building. I knew it. The sheer impossibility of it, combined with the earlier groan, sent a wave of nausea through me. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A prank. Someone had somehow gotten into the building, into a frequency range I didn't recognize, and was trying to mess with me. But the voice, it was unlike anything I had ever heard. It scraped at the edges of my sanity. And then came the chilling, explicit request, delivered with a slow, deliberate cadence that somehow cut through the static, making every syllable ring with terrible clarity. Report to SSS. Fi VOC. Then my hand tightened around the walkie-talkie, the plastic digging into my palm. My mouth was dry. Suite 507. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. This was a targeted message, a direct command. And the voice, the thought that this was a person playing a sick joke, was becoming harder and harder to cling to. It felt ancient, primordial, like something from beyond human comprehension. My first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard it, to write it off as an auditory hallucination. But the voice had been too clear, too specific to be dismissed. It was as if whatever was in Suite 507 didn't just want me to investigate, it was calling me there. It was a summons. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the crackle of the walkie-talkie, waiting for a follow-up, an explanation, anything. Nothing. Just the continued hiss of static, then the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening, filling the entire floor. I felt a profound sense of isolation. No amount of rationalization could explain away a specific, distorted, non-human voice issuing a direct order to a specific location within a building that was supposed to be empty. This wasn't a standard call for service. This was an invitation to something I instinctively knew I should avoid at all costs, but my job was a security guard. My sworn duty was to respond to any call for assistance, regardless of how unsettling it might be. My night shift reports had never prepared me for this. This was no longer just about checking locks and logging temperatures. This was about something else entirely, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I had to go. The command had been clear, chillingly so. Report to Suite 507. The voice or sound that delivered it had burrowed deep into my mind, resonating with a primeval dread. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to pretend I hadn't heard the transmission, to leave the building and never look back. But the training, the routine, the ingrained sense of duty that had defined my years as a security guard pushed me forward. Coupled with a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand what was happening, it was an irresistible, terrifying pull. I felt like a puppet on strings, drawn inexorably towards the source of the inexplicable. I took the stairs this time, not the elevator. The idea of being trapped in a metal box, alone, while whatever was in Suite 507 waited, was unbearable. Each step echoed loudly in the stairwell, a rhythmic cadence that mirrored the frantic beating of my heart. The air grew colder with every floor I ascended, a biting, unnatural chill that seeped into my bones. By the time I reached the 5th floor landing, my breath was misting visibly in the air. The hallway was plunged into near darkness, the usual overhead lights either off or their hum strangely subdued. Only the faint, ambient glow from the emergency exit signs offered any illumination. My hand instinctively went to my heavy-duty flashlight, clicking it on. The powerful beam cut through the gloom, pushing back the oppressive shadows. The whispers were back, too, low and indistinct, swirling around me like unseen currents. They seemed to emanate directly from Suite 507, growing stronger, more insistent, as I cautiously approached. My boots crunched softly on the floor, a sound that felt deafening in the profound silence of the building. As I got closer, the cold intensified, a palpable wall of dread. My fingers, still gripping the flashlight, were numb. The frosted glass door of Suite 507 loomed before me. It looked even darker, more opaque than before, as if the very darkness of the room was pressing against the glass. The previous groan had faded, but a new sound was emerging from within, a soft, repetitive scratching, like long nails dragging across a hard surface. It was methodical, deliberate, and deeply unnerving. I pressed my ear to the cold glass, straining to hear over the rapid thump of my own heart. The scratching continued, closer now, and I could hear a faint, ragged breathing, deep and irregular, like something struggling for air. And then woven into the scratching and breathing was a whisper, a singular, drawn-out syllable that sounded like a prolonged, sibilant SSSSSS. I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that what was inside was not human. No person could make those sounds, no animal I knew of. This was something else. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, so cold it burned. As my fingers wrapped around the handle, I felt a faint vibration, as if whatever was inside was pushing against the other side. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The room plunged into an even deeper, more profound darkness than the hallway. The air inside was freezing, an icy blast that stole my breath. My flashlight beam pierced the blackness, sweeping across the barren space. It was a large, empty room, still undergoing renovation. There were no desks, no chairs, just bare concrete floors and exposed wiring in the ceiling. The source of the noises wasn't immediately apparent. The scratching had stopped the moment the door opened. The breathing, too. All that remained was the chilling cold and the heavy, stagnant air. I took a tentative step inside, my eyes straining, my flashlight beam sweeping every corner. The whispers were gone. The silence was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then my light caught something in the far corner of the room, tucked away behind a stack of old, forgotten drywall sheets. It was a silhouette hunched over, almost perfectly camouflaged in the shadows. It was large, much larger than a human, and it seemed to be pulsing. My heart seized in my chest. I slowly, deliberately moved my flashlight beam closer. What I saw made me gasp, a choked sound stuck in my throat. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was a conglomeration. It was vaguely humanoid, but distorted, elongated, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin, and bent at unnatural angles. Its skin, if one could call it that, was a mottled gray and black, shimmering faintly in the flashlight beam, like dried, cracked mud. Its back was hunched, and from it protruded what looked like sharp, bony protrusions, almost like stunted wings or spines. It was perhaps 7 or 8 feet tall, but its crouched posture made it seem smaller. It was facing the wall, its head bowed, and it was scraping the wall with something. As my light hit it, it slowly, agonizingly turned its head. It didn't have a face in the traditional sense. Where eyes should have been, there were deep, hollow indentations, like empty sockets that stared into nothingness. Its mouth was a gaping maw, stretched unnaturally wide, filled with jagged, mismatched teeth that gleamed wetly in the light. No lips, just a raw, tearing cavity. And that was when I saw what it was scraping the wall with. It was using its own teeth, long, sharp, yellow teeth, dragging them across the concrete, creating those terrible, deliberate gouges. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, a primitive, debilitating fear that locked my muscles. This was not a human intruder. This was not a ghost. This was a nightmare made manifest, something that defied all logic, all reason. It was beyond my ability to comprehend, a creature from the darkest corners of human dread. And it had called me here. It had asked for a security guard, and I had answered. My night shift reports had never warned me about this. It was a terrifying, absolute truth, solidified in the form of this monstrous entity. The creature in Suite 507 continued to slowly turn its head, those hollow, empty sockets fixing on me with an unsettling intensity. There was no light in them. No discernible pupils, just an abyss that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. The air in the room grew even colder, and I could feel my own body temperature plummeting, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. It was as if the creature itself radiated an unnatural cold, a void of warmth and life. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. My flashlight beam, my only defense, began to waver in my trembling hand. It remained hunched, its limbs still bent at those impossible angles, but the sheer size and unnaturalness of it filled the room. The silence was broken only by my own ragged breathing, which sounded like gasps in the oppressive quiet. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the cold concrete floor. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, but a primal fear kept me paralyzed, staring into those empty sockets. This was the source of the whispers, the scratches, the unnerving calls. This was the thing that had been haunting my night shift. Then it moved, not quickly, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate fluidity that was utterly terrifying. Its elongated arm, ending in what looked like oversized clawed hands, slowly began to extend towards me. There was a faint clicking sound as its joints articulated, a sound that was far too loud in the silence. It unfolded itself, rising to its full, towering height, which I now estimated to be closer to 9 feet. Its bony protrusions on its back seemed to stretch, almost quivering. As it rose, I could faintly hear the low, rasping breath again, a sound of profound effort or perhaps hunger. The gaping maw, filled with those jagged, yellow teeth, slowly began to open wider. There was no sound, no roar, just the silent, horrifying expansion of that cavity. I could see down into its throat, a dark, pulsating void. It was an image burned into my mind, something I will never forget. It was reaching for me slowly, almost patiently, as if it knew I couldn't escape. The sheer horror of it finally broke through my paralysis. With a choked cry, I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. It clattered to the floor, the beam bouncing erratically, casting wild, distorted shadows that danced around the room, making the creature appear to writhe. The sudden darkness, pierced only by the erratic light, was almost as frightening as the creature itself. I turned and scrambled out of the suite, my body screaming to shut the door, to put something, anything, between me and that thing. I heard the distinct sound of it moving behind me, a heavy, dragging sound, followed by a faint, sharp scraping noise. It was exiting the suite. Panic, cold, and absolute surged through me. I didn't look back, I just ran. I sprinted down the hallway, my boots pounding on the linoleum, a desperate rhythm against the silence. I could hear it behind me, the dragging sound, faster now, punctuated by the occasional click of those impossible joints. I didn't know what it wanted, or if it was pursuing me, but the thought alone propelled me forward. I burst into the stairwell, slamming the heavy fire door behind me, not even bothering to check if it latched. I crashed down the stairs, 3 at a time, stumbling, almost falling, my lungs burning, my vision blurred with tears of terror. I didn't stop until I burst out of the main entrance and into the pre-dawn cold of the parking lot, gasping for air, leaning against my car, my body shaking uncontrollably. I fumbled for my keys, my hands too numb to insert them into the ignition. It took me what felt like an eternity to start the engine, to put the car in reverse, and to finally peel out of the parking lot, leaving the silent, ominous building behind. I drove without thinking, just putting as much distance as I could between myself and that place, between myself and the terrifying reality I had faced. My walkie-talkie, still clipped to my belt, was silent. I never went back. I called Miller from a payphone at a gas station 10 miles away, babbling incoherently about a security breach and unforeseen circumstances, unable to articulate the truth. He sounded annoyed, but eventually agreed to send someone else to cover the rest of the night shift. I didn't mention Suite 507, or the creature, or the voice. Who would believe me? No one. I resigned the next day, citing personal reasons and burnout. I left everything behind, my uniform, my logbook, even the walkie-talkie. I just wanted to forget. The experience has permanently altered me. I can no longer tolerate silence. It feels heavy, pregnant with unseen horrors. I sleep with lights on, and I check every lock, every window, multiple times a night. Every creak of my old house, every whisper of the wind sends a jolt of adrenaline through me. I'm no longer the calm, collected security guard who dismissed strange sounds as faulty pipes. I know what hides in the dark now. And sometimes, late at night, When the world is quiet and the only sound is the static hum of my own thoughts, I swear I can still hear it. That raspy, distorted voice, barely audible, yet undeniably present, whispering my name. It's been years since that final night shift, but the memory, vivid and horrifying, remains as fresh as if it happened yesterday. The image of that creature, its hollow eyes and gaping maw, is etched into my mind, a permanent scar on my psyche. I tried therapy, but how do you explain something that defies all known reality? How do you articulate the chilling terror of encountering something so utterly alien, so profoundly wrong, that it shatters your understanding of the world? My life now is a quiet existence, far from the echoing halls of that building. But the silence, oh, the silence, it's no longer peaceful. It's a canvas for the echoes of those whispers, the grating sound of teeth on concrete, the memory of that distorted voice that called my name. I still wonder what it was, what it wanted, and why it was in Suite 507. Was it trapped? Was it feeding? The questions linger, unanswered, like ghosts in the periphery of my vision. I've read countless stories, searched forums, desperately seeking any shred of an explanation, but I've found nothing remotely close to what I witnessed. Sometimes I catch myself staring into shadows, convinced I see the faint, undulating outline of something too tall, too thin, just at the edge of my sight. The cold, the inexplicable cold, still visits me, a sudden drop in temperature that makes the hairs on my arms stand on end, even on the warmest days. It's a reminder that it wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and it was there. I often wonder if anyone else experienced anything in that building after I left. Did the new security guard notice anything unusual? Did those scratches ever reappear on the fourth floor wall? Or did it remain, hidden in the perpetual darkness of Suite 507, waiting for another lonely soul to answer its call? I don't know, and honestly, I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of my own home, I swear I can still hear the crackle of a walkie-talkie, followed by a faint, distorted whisper just beyond the edge of hearing, a call from the darkness. And I know deep down that it might still be out there waiting, listening.